so I'm going to try and figure out how to do this so that I don't have to stand behind this podium the whole time. Wow. Noel messes with microphones. That's our workshop. Hope you enjoy. So hi, everybody. Welcome. I thank you so much for spending an important part of your day here. I hope that you enjoy it. And let's just get into this. Since I have been like saying random stuff for the last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll actually get to the point here. Where this comes from, I have taught Ruby to a lot of people over the last almost 20 years. And sometimes when I am teaching Ruby, there's a conversation that comes up. It happens a bunch of times. And the conversation, it's often somebody who's coming from Java or C#, and I start explaining that in Ruby, we don't declare types of anything, and then I get into monkey patching, and you can kind of see a facial expression change. Their eyes get wider, and eventually we get, how do you do anything in this language? And as I said, I usually say, it just works. We've been building stuff for 30 years. Most of the time, it works fine. Actually, where I get in trouble is I say, actually, those kinds of errors don't show up as often as you think they would. It's not as big a problem as you think. And they go like, how is that possible? They're skeptical. Now I'm just kidding. I get at this point like one of a couple of different reactions. It's either like, how is this possible in a sense of delight? Like, I am freed from the shackles of this thing that I have been doing for the last 5 years. Sometimes it's genuine curiosity. I don't understand what you're saying, but I will keep going. I will pretend for the sake of not starting an argument. And sometimes people like legitimately get angry. They really feel like I am trying to scam them, that I am giving them this toy programming language that it breaks this thing that they have been told is so important, and like, how dare I? Once upon a time, I was doing Ruby onboarding for a group of people who were like largely not intro programmers. They were like longtime Unix C people, but they didn't know Ruby. And I showed the implementation of Rails string inquirer, which is a method missing hack. And somebody in the back just started laughing. Just from the code, not even this is not even like in a delighted way, but like in a cute little language you have here, kid. Like, come back to me when you get some memory management was kind of the thing. So after they say, how is this possible, I kind of like stumble through a 10-minute version of what we're going to talk about here to explain why and the kinds of things that you can do in Ruby to take advantage of the way that Ruby is dynamic in terms of the way that it handles types and handles classes. They get skeptical, but this is the long version of the session. This is called the Dynamic Ruby Toolkit. We're going to talk about ways to use we're going to talk about the ways in which I feel like I use Ruby's dynamic type structures and dynamism in general, partially to prevent these kinds of errors, how you can use it safely, and also like how you can use it effectively, how you can keep from writing static type language code in Ruby, and how you can like write Ruby shaped Ruby, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm Noel Rappin. I'm staff engineer at Chime Financial. We are hiring a little bit. We still have recruiters here, maybe even still at the end of this session. If you're interested, talk to me or talk to them at the end of it. And any questions so far? I haven't really done anything, but it's a good place to check in. Everybody here, nobody's fled for the exits yet. That's great. Wonderful. This session is meant to be interactive. We're not really going to be writing code. I'm going to show some code. We're going to talk about it. We're going to see what kinds of things you're comfortable with, what you see as what we all see as the pros and cons of different kinds of approaches, and sort of have a group thing. That is critically dependent on you asking questions or making comments or heckling, I guess, Dave. And that's going to be part of it. We're going to have a group experience, but that involves you participating in a group experience. And also, this is Dave. Hi, Dave. Dave's actually here, which I didn't realize was going to happen. I didn't realize that was actually going to happen when I put the slides together yesterday. So if you compare the things that I'm going to say about Ruby to the things that Dave said about Ruby yesterday, you will see that they don't completely line up. When I told Dave that this was the topic of my talk, he said, wait, do you have these kinds of problems in your Ruby code? And I was like, no, but this is why. We're going to talk, in those cases where I think Dave's advice would be different from what I said here, Dave's avatar is going to show up here, or Dave will mention it from the back, and we're going to talk a little, we'll talk a little bit as it comes up about different kinds of styles and how they help you do things. Okay. So I get this. Like if static typing is the guardrail that you're used to, Ruby seems scary. But the other thing I want to say is we're here till 1:22:23:50, right? We'll check in at like 2 and see if it's worth taking a 5-minute break, or if people want to power through and possibly finish a little bit earlier. We'll just that logistically. I just want to make sure I'm not keeping you captive here forever. Wanted to make sure there. Anyway, Ruby has its guardrails too, and I don't want to have a general debate about static typing, which I think can be very useful in some circumstances. There are certain kinds of team structures where it is valuable. If you have a lot of people who are new, it sort of minimizes the damage they can do. There's some communications advantage to having statically declared types. I'm not really going to talk about this. What I really want to talk about is how to use Ruby's typing. So with that, we'll start with a really basic question. What is a type? It's one of those things that sounds like it should have a super precise definition, but I don't know that it does. If I say something is a type, what does that mean to you?
I want to describe what my data's shape is and
Okay,
understand.
so it's the shape of your data. What else? Anybody else want to give in? What methods it responds to, so the behavior, the way it behaves, kind of. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I guess.
It's like a first-class thing in your programming language.
A first-class thing in my programming language, meaning, expand on that for a second. So. It's important.
It has certain properties.
Types are important. At a certain, okay.
Different than other things.
Okay. Any others? Okay, so I think there are like 3 ways that the word type gets operationalized. Sort of traditionally, you're all Ruby programmers, so this didn't land. But historically, in like C era, a type was a cue to the compiler to do memory management. Sarah alluded to this morning. When you say something is a particular kind of integer in C or in Rust or in Go or whatever, you're explicitly telling the compiler that it needs to do something with memory that it didn't need, how much memory it needs to allocate. And that is one way that types are used. Another way we kind of got at, it's a cue about how to operate on data, it's behavior. The way that I think a lot of people who come from static typing languages think about it, though, is as a subset of valid values. When I say something is an integer, that means 3 is a legal value for it, 7 is a legal value for it, but 2.5 is not, and like green is not. And so I think a lot of times when people come to Ruby, this is the thing that they're missing. Like they're comfortable with the idea that different types have different values, that maps onto Ruby from whatever they're coming from, but the idea that you can limit values, that you really can't do that in Ruby, that's the part that I think people are missing. So in that context, what we'll be talking about for type error, it's an error at runtime that is caused by having an object of an unexpected type. So it will either crash, if you're lucky, it will crash out. If you are not lucky, you will get weird subtle bugs because it thinks it's a string and it's doing what it wants, doing the best it can. Does Ruby have types? Yeah, I'm seeing nods. I'm not seeing anybody shake their head, which is, Ruby has objects. That I agree with that. Sort of, kind of, maybe. Elaborate.
We have type-like things.
We have type-like things. Is that actually elaborating on sort of, kind of, maybe? There's a joke. I'm sorry. Sorry.
So classes is a good term.
Mm-hmm.
That a class is, if you will, a kind of type.
A class is a kind of type.
Yes.
Okay.
So in the same way that green is not an integer,
Right.
Whereas you can assign something of different types to the same.
Okay.
variable. But the class fits a lot of the description of what we describe as a type.
Okay. I will buy that for the most. Yeah.
So kind of
What? So kind of maybe. Yeah. Anybody else want to?
I don't think it has types.
I don't think it has. You don't think it has types? Okay. Because.
Because you can pretty much do anything with any object.
Okay. So in this, in like this sense, Ruby doesn't have types, right? In the subset of valid value sense. Okay. Anybody else want to?
Well, there's numeric, right? Numeric is a type, isn't it?
Well, numeric is a class. So I guess that just is sort of kinda. I don't know. Are there any what?
What about like blocks, procs?
Procs are objects. Blocks are sort of weird. But proc is a class. Block is not a class. It's sort of a weird syntactic thing that.
Especially handled,
Yeah. So in the way that we were talking about this before, Ruby doesn't generally, at a high level, Ruby doesn't worry about types for memory management, with the exception that some things like blocks or like small integers or symbols or whatever are a special case, but you as the developer don't have to care about that. Ruby does use types or objects or classes or something to determine behavior. Like integers behave differently than strings, which behave differently than hashes, which behave differently than your user class or whatever. Ruby doesn't have that subclass thing. I've kind of talked around it. It doesn't, by default, I know RBS exists and I know sorbet exists, and we're going to pretend they don't for the next half an hour because it makes this more complicated. But Ruby doesn't, by default, have, most Rubyists work in projects that do not have something that analyzes their program statically and says, this is expecting an integer and you're sending it a string. Okay. Classes, types, we meant on this. I think structurally speaking, like at the very most concrete level in Ruby, a type is determined by the messages that are sent to the object. If I have a method and it's calling length and square bracket and like, I don't know, max on whatever its argument is, then the type of the object that it expects there is something that it expects those three methods. Like really at the end of the day, that's the kind of type checking you get dynamically at Ruby, more or less by default. Classes are very, very convenient ways of talking about sets of methods that an object might receive. So classes are like, as you said, sort of kinda. Like it's a very strong overlap, but it's not the only thing in Ruby that has an overlap. Modules, as Dave was talking about yesterday, modules can be a way of specifying. Individual objects can be made to respond to methods that their class does not. And on the one hand, you probably don't do that a lot, but on the other hand, that's how class methods in Ruby work. Yes, Ruby sort of kind of has types, and classes sort of kind of are. It's very convenient in most circumstances to act as though classes as types or structs are types or whatever. It's not 100% the same concept. You're not 100%. It's not 100% going to predict behavior, but it will like 95% predict behavior. Okay. So. Anyway, I'm coming from this from a perspective saying that I think that Ruby's dynamic behavior is important and worth preserving, while also like trying to make sure that the program doesn't get unexpected errors. Like that's kind of the balance here. Like, so I want to talk about a small piece of code that we're going to look at in a couple of different directions. So this is what I hope this is readable. This is you can think of this as a stand-in for a more complicated piece of code. I just wanted something simple that we could all get around. Think of this as part of like a resume matching system. So you have a user, they have a set of experiences, so the type might be Ruby or JavaScript or management or whatever, and the amount is a number of years. And so it keeps a hash, the user keeps a hash of all of its experiences, and then there's a method qualifies that takes another hash of experiences and compares against it. So if the user has 10 years of Ruby and 15 years of JavaScript, and the other thing says we're looking for 5 years of Ruby and 7 years of JavaScript, it matches. Okay? I'm not really asking you to critique this code yet. The thing that I wanted to say about this, here's this being used. And again, like this is not, think of this as a stand-in for like a more complicated real world system in the sense that this is just like a toy version. So this code is not doing any type checking at all. And the place I want to start is there's a really good chance that that's fine. Like this could be embedded in a system where for whatever reason, type errors are not going to happen or are going to be very rare, or my favorite thing, indicate that something else really terrible has gone wrong. And so this having a type error is your secondary problem, and your first problem is that like your database blew up or something like that. So I wanted to start by saying like, this is simple. It's not explicitly checking for whether the types are symbols or strings or whatever. And there's a really good chance that that is fine, right? So we're going to assume, though, that for whatever reason, this is exposed to user input or something in a way that directly means that we need to check what's happening. Good so far? Questions, comments, nods? You're not throwing a cookie at me yet. I think that's a positive. It's good for... that's good. So what is, I think, the most common, without having actually like done any real analysis on this, what's the most common probable cause of type errors in production Ruby code? Yes? Nil where you're not expecting nil. Yes. So nil where you're not expecting nil, which manifests typically as a method not found error, no such method error, is the most common case, in part because it's sort of the hardest to predict where nil is going to show up. And often that nil means that something has gone wrong someplace else, and you're only seeing the effects right here. So in this particular code base, like you could have nil in a couple of different places. You could do that second line here, which actually will work. It will, with the previous code, it will create nil as a key in the hash and then never match it against anything. The second one will also work, but will fail when you try to match up because it will try to compare nil with the greater than symbol, which will fail. The third one will just flat out break. And the last one will break subtly because if there is no Go experience in the other one, if you go back and look at the original code, that will also compare against nil in the bottom line there. So that will also, I'm going backwards. So that will also cause problems. Okay. So we're going to talk about a couple of different high-level strategies and where you might use them or not use them to harden this code. All right. I hope everybody's kind of on board with the project here, because again, otherwise it's going to be a long hour. So the first strategy at a top level is you blow up the code. You react loudly to surprising input at the point that you discover the surprising input. So, for instance, if the amount comes in as nil, you just throw an error. Strengths and weaknesses of this approach? Question mark? What? It's not very graceful. Define graceful in this context.
Well, it kind of stops the flow.
Yeah, it just stops. Yeah, right. It stops your program. One thing that I sometimes used to say to clients when I was a consultant and something like this would come up and we were trying to determine the business logic, I would say, like, do you want this to block a sale? Like, if you get to this point and something's gone wrong, do you still want the sale to go through as much as it can, or and usually in that context, people would be like, "Oh, I see. Yeah, we'll try and keep it going to the point where we can take money." Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, compared to traditional typing, you find out it's broken when it's running.
Sure, this is a runtime check, not a static. This is like isomorphic to a static check because it's checking the same thing, but it's doing it at runtime. Yeah, which is in some ways worse. In some way, right? You're not getting the signal as you're writing the code that something's wrong. You're getting the signal when the code runs.
It's not exceptional. I would think of this kind of problem as an error.
Right. This. Okay. Yes. In this particular toy problem, this is probably doesn't rise to the level of an exception. In the general case, there would be situations where if you got a nil at some place where you didn't expect a nil, then it would be time to like pull the lever and stop the train, and have everybody get out. You know, did torture a metaphor or whatever. This is probably not one of them, right? I agree with that.
Why just check for nil? Why not check to see if amount's a symbol or other stuff like that?
Hold that thought. Yes. I mean, yeah. This is like, on some level, it's like too much checking and also not enough checking at the same time. Yeah. And the other thing I would say is it's kind of verbose, and you don't want to do this in every method. Like if you did this in every method in Ruby, people on your team would come after you. Like they would not be happy. For whatever reason, like that is not, for several reasons, that's not idiomatic Ruby to like check for types at runtime explicitly in code like that. Right? Which leads to the second strategy in general. If the data comes in a shape you don't expect, the first strategy is throw your arms up and do nothing or raise an error. The second strategy is to coerce it. Try to change the shape of the incoming data to match what you expect. And this has a couple of different ways that it might work. Default, this is obviously, I think, a more graceful. You're talking about graceful. You're talking about it's not an exceptional situation. Like I would consider this a perfectly reasonable way to handle a null in an amount. 0 seems like an absolutely reasonable default. If somebody passes nil, like I would absolutely, like I would let this code. You actually can't do this in the default function type because nil qualifies as a value and does not trigger a default in Ruby. It does not trigger the default value in Ruby, but it does work as the false value here. I would absolutely consider this to be a superior way to handle this particular case. Yeah. Sorry. Another thing that is like coercion is a short circuit. So if in this case, this is one of the other examples, if this other experience came in as nil, we can take that to mean we don't care what the experience is and we can just return true. Again, in the specific context, this makes sense, right? Is there a downside to doing this?
Feels like it should be false.
I mean, that's a business question for the product people, I suppose. I actually think there are other examples here that do return false on the nil. My sense was that if this came in as nil, that meant we don't care what the experience is, so everybody matches it. But if you wanted to say it means an infinite number of experience and no one matches it, like this is a toy problem. Like do it however you want to do it.
This could be masking a problem somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. So that's the danger here is that whatever is generating other experience or whatever is generating an amount is nil is a problem upstream that you are allowing to continue and making hard to debug because the side effect of this is that everybody's going to match, right? And if that's a problem, and so suddenly something goes wrong and somebody sort of uses this system and suddenly they get 20,000 matches for 30 years of Ruby experience or whatever you could make up, you are potentially hiding a problem. All of this stuff is trade-offs, right? So another thing here to solve the problem of the hash keys not matching, another thing you can do here is what is this doing? A default in case of what? In case?
Reading without the key.
Yeah, if this doesn't have the key, then this is the value is returned. This means that if you ask for, in this particular business context, this means that if you ask for experience into something and I don't have it listed, I'm assuming I have 0 experience. Again, that seems reasonable in this use case. I think that this is probably, it's dangerous because it's a little dangerous to say something is an underused Ruby feature when I don't see everybody's Ruby code. I actually think this is a little bit underused. People depend on nil being the default behavior in cases where it actually would make sense for it to be an empty list or a 0 or an empty string or something like that. There's a bunch of different kinds of code loops over hashes that get easier if you default to empty list or 0 or something like that. Okay, the third strategy here that I want to talk about, I'm calling it minimize. The idea here is you reduce your exposure to common causes of type errors. On some level, you probably do this kind of instinctively if you're comfortable with Ruby. So I just want to put a name to it so it's something that you can talk about or think about as you design code. So in this case, minimize the possibility of having random nils floating around your program causing havoc wherever they go. One way to do this, so what is this code doing? It's the same qualifies method except for the first line of the method. Did I type it wrong? What? Huh?
Are you talking about the array?
Yeah, we're talking about what is this doing that's different from the other one?
Just guarding against a single input rather than an array?
Sort of, but not quite in this context. I mean, yes and, I guess. So what's the first line actually doing? Right? Does this work? It doesn't work. It doesn't work against the screen. Ha, 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 ha.
Default coursing it into an array, right?
Yeah.
Pass nil in an empty array, which is easier to work with.
Right. That's the context here. So the array is one of the methods. Array is one of the rare capitalized methods in Ruby. There's a whole set of them that are defined in kernel. They're preferable to the 2A, 2S stuff for coercion because they are somewhat smarter against a wider range of input. In this case, array, if it already has an array, it returns the array. If it gets in one element, it returns a one-element array. And if it gets, critically for this context, if it comes in with nil, you get an empty array. And so if you're writing stuff that is in a very functional style where you're doing a lot of list processing, that's actually great. That's a great default because most of your code then doesn't have to do nil checks or anything like that. It's just an empty list, and an empty list is just going to fall through. This actually will return false if the other experience is nil. So I haven't completely replicated the business logic. But you could. This just seemed like a rabbit hole that wasn't worth going down as I was putting the code together. But so advantage and disadvantage of this structure.
I'm not a huge fan of it because it indents it a little more. Not everyone knows an array makes it nil.
Okay.
It feels worse than the
I mean, that's one of the Ruby developer things that was ever said. I don't like this because I don't even disagree necessarily. I'm just like, yeah. So people aren't going to be familiar with the idiom, which I think is reasonable. What was the other?
I don't like the indentation.
You don't like the indentation?
And then,
Did you have 3 or was that just 2? Does somebody want to speak up in favor of this?
So Rubicon default, it encourages like guard clauses and returns.
This is a Rubicon default?
No.
Oh, not doing this is a Rubicon default.
Well, like for guard, quick return.
Huh?
Early return guard clause.
I mean, yeah, I guess I would. I don't put a whole lot of stock in it's a RuaCup default because I don't use RuaCup defaults for anything. But okay, that's fair. But I think that goes along with people might not recognize this, I guess. So the defense of this is, so no one's going to defend?
A guard clause would be more obvious.
A guard clause would be more obvious.
I'll defend it.
Fine.
This is a very straightforward style because I'm just dealing with a collection the whole way through.
Yeah.
And if it's empty, I get the default behavior I expected. I don't have to worry about a no check.
Yeah.
I don't need an extra return clause. It just goes in no.
Right.
Like, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying about a guard clause is more explicit in a sense. I think in some sense it's like a category error. Like, I don't care about this being a guard clause. Like, I just want to code the behavior that I code, and I've transcended the mere need for guard clauses by going into list processing. I think that if you write in a very functional style where you're doing a lot of mapping and and finding and selecting on lists, then this makes a lot of sense. If you're not, then I can see where, like, oh, this is a pattern that people aren't going to be used to, and that's fine. Yeah.
I have kind of a silly question.
Great. I love it already.
I've never used all, without, so the first all basically.
Oh, the first all should be a question mark. It should be all question mark. That's a typo. Great question. Thank you. Only a little bit embarrassing.
I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm super missing something.
If you're having the exact same
Okay.
thought and trying to figure out what the difference was between
So
the two,
I apologize.
I have a second question. Did the shape of our data change? Because I thought we had like an array that.
It was always a hash, and now it's potentially a hash or an array of hashes. So it does change. So it does change the range. That's correct. It changes the range of possible inputs because we can now take in multiple hashes and it will just process. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing sort of depends on your business logic. But you're right. It is a change to the. You're right. And yes, it is a change to the behavior of the program.
I think that's the reason this one aesthetically looks more complicated.
You think it's why those more complicated? Well, yeah, because you're handling a separate case. It is more right. Yes. We will see a couple of things where we change the shape of the data a little bit more further on, where this might make more sense. But I think that's a perfectly fair criticism of it.
That's not my criticism.
Oh. Great. I have completely different criticism of it. Perfect. I love it. Go ahead.
So my point was actually that I think the reason that we have the additional indentation is because it supports a use case, and I think if the old code supported that use case, then it would look as complicated as this one does now.
Yes, I think that is probably true and fair. Yeah.
And I think that if we had
It's generous of you. Thank you.
in the old version, I actually really like the way that it handles array, that it allows it to be more flexible and accept different types of inputs.
All right. You guys can all meet up afterwards and fight this out. I actually do tend to like this. I tend to do a lot of list processing, and so this feels kind of natural to me. I get if it doesn't. Like there's a lot of different ways to be successful, and if you don't ultimately, you have to be comfortable with the code that you're writing, and hopefully I can say here are a couple of other things you can try to be comfortable with, or here's a way to talk about the things that you're comfortable with and the things you're not comfortable with. But if this looks weird in the context of your application and the code you're writing, it's probably weird in the context of your application and the code you're writing. Okay, more to the point, you should, if you are using nil, you should be intentional about it. You can't get away from it in the standard library. There's standard library things that are return nil. You can't change them. But in general, nil has a specific meaning. It means no data. It doesn't mean this failed, by default. And if you are using it to mean this failed, you might be better off returning an explicit symbol that says failed, or throwing an exception, or I have a whole code base that returns a result object, which is actually turning into more Go flavored than I would like my Ruby code to be. But I started with the idea that all these steps along a process would return a result object that was success or failure, and then also had metadata. I didn't need the return values, so I just wanted the success or failure. It prevented this kind of error and caused other problems because it got complicated. But the general point, though, is don't make returning nil your default if something doesn't go well. Try to think about what a more useful thing is. At the very least, if you return some weird failure symbol, you can at least tell where it came from, whereas nil just sort of sneaks in, and it's hard to see in a trace necessarily where it comes from. Okay. Also, the null object pattern, which we'll talk a little bit more later on, is another way out of this. I don't want to go into this too much because we'll talk about it again in a little bit. What is potentially the second most common cause of a type error in production level Ruby code, other than nil?
String versus symbol.
I love it when a plan comes together. So this comes from a couple of different places. Where do you see this in your code base, string versus symbol? Yeah. So what? Accessing hash. Well, yeah, and
which leads to nil problems.
yes. So your things tie together. Where I see it is I, the developer, am typing symbols into my hash keys, but it's coming from JSON or the database, which doesn't know what a symbol is, so it's returning a string. We're checking it. It doesn't match. In one case, I know about a case where there was the hash was caching data. But the cache keys were symbols and the incoming data was coming in as strings, so they were getting 0 cache hits, and because it actually wasn't changing behavior, only performance, nobody noticed for a very long time. So yeah, that's the use case here, and you can see it. You could imagine it in this case. The experience is coming in as a symbol, and the incoming thing is coming in as a string, and there's a capitalization problem here also, which is separate but related. Like you gotta. So what are some options? How can we deal with this? Like I think this is a real problem. You actually have to mitigate against this.
Coerce.
Huh? Coerce. Right. You could do this, but I don't recommend it. Why wouldn't I? I mean, I guess like just for completeness sake, why is this a bad idea?
Because it's easy to fix.
Huh?
It's easy to work around.
Yeah. Right. You said this is not an exceptional condition, right? Right. So you can sorry, this is related. You can just fail. This is effectively this is coercion. We're normalizing the key. What is good about this? And what is bad about this? So what this is doing is when the key comes in, we're downcasing it. We're converting it to a symbol, and when we use it later on at the bottom, we are also downcasing it and converting it to a symbol. I mean, yeah, the bunch of which in this context, yes, but you're creating a bunch of extra objects, I guess. If that's the tent pole of your creating objects problem, then great, you're probably doing great on all kinds of other stuff. Other comments on this?
To me, the capitalization of JavaScript and things that we've got like this user input that could look like anything. It could have spaces. It could have all sorts of
Okay.
things to it.
So we're a little bit back to not enough type checking and also too much type checking. Yeah, I think that's fair. Anything else? Anybody else?
It kind of feels weird to like keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah, I don't love the duplication here at all. Huh?
This is backwards. We're turning it back into a symbol instead of like we should just have strings, and we're assuming we have strings coming in.
I mean, you can assume you have. You could do. I suppose whether you choose to represent them internally as symbols or strings is like an implementation decision. You could do it either way. Someone looked at this and said, "Oh, you're expecting a symbol, and it's going to be symbol not downcase, and that's going to fail." And that's actually not true. Symbols respond to downcase. I was like, oh yeah, I need to change the code. And then I went into IRB and I was like, symbol not downcase. Oh, well, I guess it works. It actually, symbols actually do respond to a fair subset of strings API for some reason, huh? It got me too. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to change all of these examples. And then I actually checked, which was, so the lesson is check things. So anyway, yeah, whether you represent these internally or not as symbols or strings, I don't really care. I guess symbols are probably marginally better from a performance standpoint, but the way Ruby does strings and hash keys, it probably doesn't. Again, if this is your biggest performance problem, you're doing a lot of stuff right. Okay, or you could do this. What's this? And what do I got going on here? So we have hash.different access, which I think accepts an argument that is a default. We'll pretend it does. Hash with indifferent access is a Rails thing that, as you said, allows you to call. I can't remember whether it actually stores them as strings or symbols. The implementation of hash with indifferent access is surprisingly complicated. I looked it up as part of this too because I was like, oh, it's really simple. They just swap in like the lookup. But there's no hook in the Ruby hash class to say like to transform a key before you look it up. So they had to, every place that it looks up a key, they have to do the same like coercion check which makes the, whatever. It was more complicated than I thought it was going to be, which was, I guess, the point. In general, what's good about this setup? What's bad about this setup?
It's going to be readable to a lot of people who know active support.
This is more readable than whatever we were doing.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's hash with
Right.
access.
Yeah. That's people who are comfortable with Rails will be comfortable with this, whereas whatever weird normalization thing we were doing is a customized. This is a standard-ish, standard-like. This is very Rails. Parentheses derogatory, parentheses complimentary. Uh,
Does it
uh,
do the down case?
what? Okay, yes, it does not do the down case, which is, yes, that is also true. Yes, you in the back in the blue shirt?
If you got rid of the after access and comma experience,
Uh-huh.
then you're free to use any time you want the experience.
What? If I got rid of the adder access or?
Well, the only reason you are worried about this, no, the after access in there is exposing experience to the outside world.
Yeah, I suppose it is, yes.
If you get rid of that, then all you have to do is map it to symbol to screen.
Well, yeah, but that's all this is doing.
Yeah, but you don't have to go through all the extra jump.
Okay, yes. This is, for whatever reason, exposing it to the outside world, which it probably doesn't have to, which exposes this to things that it wouldn't otherwise. I think that's also true. What? I could make it private. Yeah, there's all, yes.
No, my point is, the hash with the different access will work even outside the context of the user class, right? So if someone accesses a user class experience, square brackets, whatever, hash with different access will work. When you get rid of that, then you won't have to make it work. And you're free to just force it to a simple.
Well, yeah, right. If it's not public facing, then I can do whatever I want internally and nobody else is going to care, but I still have to do something internally. Right? Or am I missing? Yeah. Yes, I could do something simpler if I wanted to, yes. What's the downside of doing this? So as I was preparing this last year's version of this talk, I read an article, which unfortunately I can't place, that suggested that hash with indifferent access was like a terrible code smell and a disaster, and a sign of, I don't know, ill intent or whatever. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember. Why? Like, what's the argument?
So one of the arguments, right, is like you're taking the random hash, and in this case, you actually don't care if it's strings. Maybe you don't care if it's uppercase or lowercase, although that might be a problem here. And you're wrapping that in. This is just going to handle it, and I will think about it. And maybe we should think more about the inputs.
Yeah. Does somebody else want to? Before I come in, does somebody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess just piggybacking off of thinking more about the inputs, I feel like this indicates things can come in as a symbol or a string. And if you're adding more code to this later, it's just more, variance.
Squishiness is, yeah. Yeah, the argument, more or less, is that you're allowing teams to be sloppy about what they send to you, which, I don't know. How do people feel about that argument? What?
I would say yes, it's adding more complexity. Like, you have to think about all these different things you have to handle.
I would say whether it's adding complexity or removing complexity depends on your reference point. Like, from the point of view of somebody calling this, it's reducing complexity.
I guess it depends on, like, if it's an end-to-end system, you can control the inputs.
Right.
If you're saying it's like a different team, then
Yeah.
you're going to have the complexity no matter what, you're just moving it.
Okay, I think that's fair.
I'm not a huge fan because if you start doing this often, teams will start doing strings or symbols randomly. And if one place you don't do that, now you're gonna have errors.
I mean, that was essentially the argument. That was essentially. Have you seen any code here that you do like? Is my question. No is an okay answer. Like, it's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to pick on you or anything. I just.
I like guard classes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I sincerely thank you. I appreciate it. I really do appreciate somebody coming in here and saying this is terrible. I genuinely. I'm not kidding. Like, it's very useful for the whole. But like,
It makes me think about the quality of the data.
Okay, yeah.
It's like something you want to ensure rather than the type itself.
Right. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. But part of the question is, I guess, like, if this is embedded in a larger system, who ultimately is responsible for the data being good, right? If this is coming from user input where they might type random junk, then you have one standard of care that you need to have. And if it is part of like a batch processing system that's already been vetted, then you might not have to do this. But you and you.
I would say that in a small, closely controlled system, this would feel sloppy to me. Like, I have given up basically on whatever this is going to be string or symbol. Like I should have better control, but if you are making this like a part of library you publish like a gem, this could be so robustness, Postel's law, like you relax.
That's the second time you've done that. Sorry, yeah. So sorry, the comment was that in the context of a library that might be used by a bunch of different people, the robustness, I'm doing this for this recording, the robustness would be valuable, but in other contexts, it would potentially be like throwing your hands up and not caring about the incoming data.
I was kind of going to say that it comes back to control versus trust. Like, do you want to control what people can ask you, or do you want to trust them to be able to work with your system in a way that works best for the code base that's calling it? Like, if they're calling it and they're working off of Ruby, maybe it makes sense for them to call with symbols. And if they're working from an API or they're working from user input, maybe it makes sense to call with strings. And if you wanted to control and be like, no, I want it to be strings, and I want to know for sure that you would put JavaScript in this way so that I can map to that key, and that's what's most important. Maybe you say like, no, I want to control what types are actually coming in here. But if you just want to trust that they will use it in a way that's reasonable and makes sense for the system that's calling it, you give them different access.
Right. Yes. Yes, there's a question of what level of trust you have on the incoming data and what level of control you want to get under this. What was referenced here was called Postel's law. It says it's misused a lot or abused a lot. The idea is that you are liberal in what you take in, meaning that you accept a lot of different types of data and try to do the best with it, but conservative in what you send out to other areas. It's really a way of managing an ecosystem more than it is a guideline of any individual piece of code, but yeah, it does come up here. Just as a time check, it's now 2:10. I am inclined to sort of blow through unless people really want to. I won't stop if like people want to take 5 minutes. The problem is it's hard to get a group like this out and back in 5 minutes, and I'm inclined to just go through and stop a couple minutes short, if that's okay with everybody. Yes? No? If you were saying, I was hoping for a quick way that I could sneak out and have nobody notice, I can close my eyes for 15 or 20 seconds and just not pay any attention. Okay. So broadly speaking, in this context, the caller should not be responsible for data cleanup. The callee should be. I about 75% believe this. I think that there are cases where it does make sense to insist on the caller, like, getting things. And again, it's a question of like trust and control. Like, under what circumstances does it make sense to insist that you send me a string or a downcase string or whatever, versus like what am I willing to do in this? I mean, another version of this is this version actually also does hide potential downstream errors, right? If there's a problem in a downstream code where it's now sending strings instead of symbols or symbols instead of strings, this will hide it, and that might be a problem. It could be a problem. Okay, hashes in general. I don't want to belabor this a whole lot. We have kind of talked about this a little bit. One of the things about hashes in Ruby is you don't know what their keys are going to be, and it's annoying to try and force it, which can lead to type-like errors where you get hashes with different keys. We'll talk about a couple of ways in a second that are kind of amenable that manage that. My advice here would be to minimize the use of raw hashes, which goes opposite what Dave said yesterday, which was to use a lot of raw hashes. So, start using. I think that where this was coming here was that Dave was coming from a place where he didn't see people using raw hashes instead of database objects, and I come from a place where I see people using raw hashes where they should be using real objects all the time. So somewhere in the middle there. The thing about converting hashes into objects is that enables you to take advantage of the things that Ruby lets you do with having one kind of object instead of another kind of object. So they can gain behavior. Different kinds of hashes can gain different kinds of behavior. You can gain the ability to filter on them more easily. You could filter on them based on their keys or whatever, but you can filter on them more easily. Which leads to the last kind of strategy I was going to talk about here, which is objectify. We're going to be creating a bunch of classes here. But we can take that experience, that thing of experience, that key value pair, that is like a thing that has meaning in the world. Like it is, for lack of a better term, like an object. Like it has attributes, it has potentially behavior, it's a thing. So we can make it a class, this could be a struct, this could be a data object, like whatever. But we can call it a thing, we can give it a name. I am generally in favor of giving concepts names in your code because it makes it easier to talk about them. So in this case, we are giving this a name. We're calling it an experience. It has a kind and it has a number of years. In this case, notice that I am now normalizing the kind myself rather than using a different access. And this now owns its own qualification. This is similar to the way that you would use, like that you would do like a triple equals or something like that. It's checking if the kinds match. It's checking whether the years match. Right. And you could do other type checking here. Typically, you actually would error out or do something here if the other object was not also an experience. You can, you can't. I don't really care. This is the Dave thing to say that I created a class here, and this could be a struct or a data object or something like that. So you can use this like this. So in this case now this is changing. We're now expecting the other experience to be a list of experiences and not a hash of them. But the behavior actually is very similar. We're checking against each individual one here. Does this look better to you, worse to you, different, better number one, better number two? How does this look to you? Well, it's more complicated. That's true. Well, it's yes, and it's more complicated, but it is made out of less complicated pieces.
It's not yet worth it, but it could be worth it.
Right. This is like this is a toy problem levels of if I showed you something that was really complicated enough to justify this, I would spend 2 hours explaining the business logic, and then we would all go home. Which great, happy to do that, but this, sorry. Other comments other than this is more complicated?
I would be happy with the array method code here because it's already.
You would have, okay, yeah, that's fair, and that's sort of a side effect of the way I put the code together rather than a deliberate choice. But yeah, to have the array method here since it's already array, yeah, you could also splat other experiences and call array flatten or whatever. Like there's a couple of ways to do that to ensure an array, and I agree that it's probably reasonable to do that in this context.
But we lost the constant time lookup from hash.
We did lose the constant time lookup, yes, but yes, we did, and yes. And that may or may not be important depending on who you're doing. And there may be other ways to work around that, right? Yeah. Yes. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah. It looked like you were looking past me for a second. I like that for def qualifies, other experience indicates that it would take a list of experience records, but it would still pass it something else, which I think would break the def qualifier.
Yes, yeah, right. Yeah, I sort of realized as I was putting this code together about type checking that there's all these places where this code doesn't do enough type checking in the name of doing some type checking, and I think you're right. And I agree that it's kind of a balance. And it goes back to it goes actually back to the trust and control thing. Do I feel like I need to put this check everywhere? And we'll see in a second, are there ways where I can put this check in places where it's advantageous to me to put the check and then have other places where I'm not worrying about it? But yeah, I think that's a great point.
This code does behave differently than computers do.
Yes, it doesn't have the constant lookup, or did I mess something else up?
It has functional differences as well.
Okay.
If you put the same experience in twice, the previous one, the second experience wins, and this one, the first experience.
Okay. Everybody else that noticed that, you're right. You are absolutely right. Whether that is an important difference in context, I was assuming a situation where there would not be a second thing here. The hash case, it's actually a little bit different from what you said. If the other experience is a hash, then you don't have duplicate experiences coming in, whereas this one you might, right? I agree with that, yes. Which leads me to the next thing that I was going to do, which is to say, we wrapped the hash here, we wrapped the hash data, but we actually haven't wrapped the array that is the set of experiences. And that is also a thing in the world, and that is also a thing in the world that you could wrap. This does not actually check for uniqueness, but it easily could, right? So this is a set of experiences. It's an enumerable, it's delegating each to the internal array, and then it is doing its own check here. We have created an object to represent the thing that is a set of experiences. One of the advantages of doing something like that is that these things sort of grow additional behavior, they attract additional behavior, uniqueness qualifier being one of the things that this might attract, right? Yes?
Technically, because you have an add experience method, you can do something that's not possible with the hash, which is that you can add if you get another experience.
Yes, so that, right. So yeah, another thing that if this came in as like Ruby 10 and then another Ruby 10, I could either say that the second one or the first one wins, or I could add them together if that made sense in the business logic for some reason that eludes me, honestly. But yeah, you by encapsulating this, you have a little bit more freedom to make this more complicated without exposing that complexity to the thing that might use this, right? Good? Yes? No?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the value of the enumerable?
Of using it as an enumerable, of making it enumerable. The advantage of making this an enumerable is that then for the purposes of anybody who uses this class, they can treat it like an array. So they can map it, they can select, they can filter and whatever, and they don't have to worry about the implementation. The implementation happens to be an array, but it also might not be, right? But anybody outside of this doesn't have to care about that, what the implementation is. Again, is it making a big difference in this particular 10 lines of code? No, it's not. Embedded in a larger system, it might.
Okay. Like where things are happening with experiences that are much more than like checking a qualification and stuff.
Yeah, right, yeah. So you might, I don't know, you might have something where you are like, find all of the job listings that expect at least 10 years of Ruby experience. Okay. Then you might have a bunch of these that you want to filter on or something like that. Who knows, right? So in that case, the user class then is basically just delegating, right? It's delegating the add experience and it's delegating the qualifies. And whether this means you still need a user class or not, I don't know. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But we've completely replicated the behavior in two classes. As you said, we have made this significantly more complicated. In some sense, we have also we have set up a situation where we have more control over where the type checking happens, where the data validation happens, right? Whether that's worth it or not is going to depend on the project. What is happening here? What? The units are different. Yeah. What? So yes, the first person, somebody suggested these are just too high, but specifically in my head what happened here is that somebody entered them as years and the other source is entering them as days, right? I would argue that's a type error. Even though these are all integers, my argument is, so people are nodding. Is anybody going to disagree with me that that's a type error? What? No? Huh? This is a type error. I expected years and I got days. Those are different types. We would expect them to have different behavior. And just because they're both implemented as integers doesn't make this any less of a type error. What's interesting about this is that this is a type error that Java is not going to capture. All right? And you really can't design a static type system that is going to capture this because the sets overlap. Like you could say anything over 100 is unlikely to be years or anything over 50. You can move your edge case to any place that makes sense, but 0 is still a valid value in both of these sets. And so that is, a traditional static typing system is not going to capture this. Which I think gets to one of the really real points I was going to make about why these errors are not super salient in like complicated Ruby code, which is that static typing is a subset of data validation. Any complicated program that is saying like, I need this data to have a certain shape, I need this number to be in this range. If I'm saying the years need to be in the range 1 to 50, implied in that is that they have to be a number, right? Green is not going to pass that data validation check no matter what, right? Whether I statically type check it or not, the error is not going to happen. And the error is not going to happen in practice because in practice, a complicated system is going to do data validation somewhere and is going to filter that out or capture it or do something with it at that point. And the more complicated the system, the more likely it is that it's going to do a complicated data validation at some point that is going to effectively include type checking. Even if it doesn't explicitly include type checking, it's going to implicitly include type checking. I spent a really long time specifically trying to teach people test-driven development. And a little bit like some of the examples here, one of the side effects of teaching test-driven development is that any problem that is simple enough to be exposed in a workshop like this is also simple enough to be solved without test-driven development, which means you are doing, in the context of a skeptical workshop person, somebody's coming in and you're showing them all this rigmarole with red, green refactor, and they're like, I could just write the code. I don't get it. I submit in some sense that static typing is the opposite, right? Static typing is something that seems very clear and has a very obvious win in really simple code, and is less and less of an obvious win as the code gets more complicated in terms of the data validation. As the code gets more complicated, it also has a benefit in terms of potentially in terms of communication. There are maybe other things that are useful in complicated code base, but even in a complicated static type system, that is never enough data validation. You are also going to have to do other things, and so the lack of it is never a cause of your program not doing data validation. That was a horrible sentence, but I think hopefully you get the point. Does that make sense? Does that seem obvious, not obvious, reasonable, not reasonable? Yeah. Okay. So years versus days. Sorry.
We can often give a title to a particular argument, right?
Oh, yes.
And we construe that in some way is type checking.
By naming the argument?
Yeah.
So,
We have days of experience, years of experience.
So,
the mistake that happened there
wouldn't have, so,
is that type checking.
So is it type checking so small talk, right? So sort of, kind of, maybe, yeah. So small talk, the programming language, the convention for local variable names and method arguments in small talk was that it would be like a string, an array, strings, like some strings. The convention was that if you didn't have a compelling thing to name an incoming argument, you would name it with its data type for exactly that reason, so that you get some of the communication value of this is the shape of the data that I expect to come in. And I actually, like, as somebody who used Smalltalk before Ruby, like, I love that. I don't actually do that in my Ruby code, but I would do that in my Ruby code if I didn't think other people were going to look at me funny in a way that I don't like. But I'm like, is it type checking? No. Is it communicating intent in a useful way? Yeah, I think it does. And I think you'll see here that, like, on some level, you kind of have to, on some level in Ruby, you kind of have to respond to those signals, right? I think, yes, I agree. So the thing I was going to do here is expose these types by turning them into classes. There's a bunch of ways to do this. This is possibly the most complicated imaginable, just because I did it less complicatedly, and then I thought it would be more fun if I showed it the more complicated way. So this is creating a duration class where days is the internal thing, and then it is creating a years subclass and a month subclass that both define in terms of days. Does it have to be like this? No. Could it be one class with 3 class methods? Yes. One of the advantages of this is that you can switch on the type in a way that is on the intended type when you call it. The type is exposed in a way that is nice. Do you have to do it this way? No. Like, how does this look to people? Does this look terrible? You're fleeing from the room? This is the kind of thing that gets me in trouble on Teams. What? It does work. Huh? It will work, yeah. Yeah, the use of it, sorry. Dave, as I was going over this last night, I was picturing Dave saying, these don't need to be classes, this is just a data object with a year's method, a day's method, and a month's method. And that's true. Also, I did it this way. So the use here, one of the advantages of this is that the way that this is written right now, and almost any way that you would be actually writing this, whether it was a set of functions or whether it was this, you're actually saying in the code it's years. And I think that has communicative value. You're not preventing somebody from fat fingering in or just misinterpreting it and typing in 750 or whatever, but you are giving the person looking at it a fighting chance of understanding what's supposed to be there. So, yeah, sure. The other thing that I would say here is one of the advantages of creating objects and classes in this context is that you have an initialize method. And the thing that is great about an initialize method is there's so much in Ruby that you can't control the order of what it happens. But one of the cases in Ruby where you actually can do that is you know that before you call an instance method on something, initialize ran on it. And you can take advantage of that to do your data validation or do whatever you need to do. And that's a subset of the idea that you should create boundaries. What's a boundary? Has anybody used the term, seen the term? Anybody want to? We're all getting a little tired at this point. I'm also getting tired, which is why I want you to answer the question for me. Huh? Yeah, a boundary is a set of code that has a specific, it's a point of entry into a subset of your code where you know the code is only going to come in through here or through here or through here, and therefore you can do the data validation at the boundary and you don't need to worry about it again. And that's how you get to the point where you could write code like the original code that doesn't do type checking because the data validation that you felt like you needed to do is already done at the boundary. So we can do this. Another way to do this This is a pass-through method to create duration. Actually, I don't like this code base anymore. I don't like this much. But one way that you can do this here is essentially this is a factory method that is creating years, month, days, whatever. I don't want to dwell on this example a whole lot. I want to talk about using the object system and creating different and being more open to the idea that you have types in this system that you haven't created yet, right? I think that as a point of like object-oriented design, people are reluctant to create types that are not obvious. Like everybody's okay with, these are the tables in my active record database. Each one of those is a model, and I'm going to create those. And maybe I have service classes, and maybe like a report is a class and things like that. But if you push on the design a little bit, you can create types that are maybe not obvious, but will go a long way towards simplifying the code and creating these kind of boundaries and these kinds of places where data validation can happen. So, yes.
Do you think that the reason people feel slightly uncomfortable creating these types is because they don't have a home?
Do I think the reason people are uncomfortable creating these types is because they don't have a home? I think possibly that's true in Rails applications. I think that the reason people are uncomfortable creating these kinds of types is because they feel silly doing it, and it feels like crazy overkill. Like the years, month, days thing, like that is admittedly like overkill for this problem, right? And I think that people are not trained to do this. A normal Ruby onboarding will not talk about doing this. You kind of have to really read Pooter, Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby, to really get a feel for doing this kind of thing. Or 99 Bottles of OOP will also talk about it. I just think people are are not in the mindset of doing it. And I think that the fact that there isn't a home for it is downstream of the fact that people don't do it, rather than upstream of it. But I could be wrong, like I don't know.
So, is what you're getting at that because like in these smaller places where it would maybe be like where you could kind of get practice in thinking in this way, like it's silly if you don't do it, and therefore when you get to these bigger cases, you're not well practiced in it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not easy to see it.
Yeah, so like because it doesn't make sense to do these in small cases, you're not in practice in doing it in large cases. Yeah, I think that's exactly. That's how I think that that's how I think the issue goes. Yeah. Yes.
This makes me think about like working with like interactors, monads, and result.
Working with interactors and monads and result types. Yes.
It's like things that you just don't really use it until you get to that situation. Part of
Right.
that starts speaking to specific functional programming or design patterns.
Right, yeah. Very, very early on in my career, I was working at Smalltalk, and I was doing something that was like, it was a simulation of like a pipe design. So the pipes had a direction; they were pointing up. They were up, down. The flow of liquid had an up, down, left, right. And I remember very clearly the idea when I realized, oh, direction could be a class. And then the class could say like, what is the opposite of this? What is a left turn from here? What is a right turn from here? And all of a sudden, all of these like compound if statements that I had in my code just went away. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like there's cases where you have structures in your code where you can use the object system to absorb some of the complexity of the code. And so that your actual code from some directions doesn't have as much complexity. You have more classes or more objects or more types. But each of them is simpler and easier to test and easier to validate. So for example, if you have multiple methods in a class that all take the same set of arguments, especially if they're passing that set of arguments to each other, those methods are probably a type. They're probably a class by themselves, with those arguments being the instance variables of that type. Right? If you have multiple if clauses to the same condition, you may have two types. So if you're continually checking if nil, or if you're continually checking if admin, if you're continually checking for your user as an admin, you probably have an admin user and a non-admin user class. And then you ask once, do I have an admin user or a non-admin user? And you get that class. And then you just use polymorphism and the object system absorbs the complexity. So for example, this is potentially part of the same system. This is a report. It's doing different things if it says matches. I updated all the other slides to say qualifies. I didn't update this one. If the experience matches, it's doing one set of things, and it's doing another set of things in the other way. I submit that it is actually kind of hard here to tell what each individual report looks like because it's distributed a little bit. And we're making the same if statement 2 times, right? And again, this is a proxy for a more complicated piece of code where you might be doing this a bunch of times. So another way to do this is to up top say, do I have a passing report? Do I have a failing report? Do I have a passing row or a failing row? And then I write very, very simple methods for what passing row and failing row is, and I just call them, right? I think this is less complicated than the previous one, even though it has the extra classes. And I think that the simplicity of not having that if statement all over the place, is a win here. And then you can do data validation and things like that, but you also always know whether you're passing row and failing row have different behavior. By the way we have been talking about this, they are different types. So I am just reifying is a fancy word. I'm giving the concept a name, and I'm giving the name a place to be in the code. My experience is that as you get used to doing this, you will find that these kinds of small pieces of named code absorb a behavior. Behavior comes into them. And some of the complexity of your code just sort of melts into Ruby. What is doing the lookup to determine whether you are getting the passing row or the failing row in each one of these? Ruby is. It's doing it as part of method lookup. I don't have to do that. Like my code can be simpler by allowing Ruby to do stuff. So what is this? Does this look good to people, bad to people? Does this look like we only have 10 minutes left, Noel, stop asking us questions to people?
I like this. I think it's pretty. I'm thinking about like what it would look like inside Rails.
What do we look at? Yeah. So where I do this, if I am doing this in a Rails program, a lot of times I will keep the inner classes as nested classes. For a long time I didn't write nested classes in Ruby, but now I do pretty regularly for things like this. And so this is a model. Like it's a model that doesn't touch active record. If you want to create a domain directory and say that it's for domain logic, you could do that. You could put it in lib, although I think most teams wouldn't. But yeah, I would probably put this top level class in app models in a Rails application, or I would create like an app domain. If there were a bunch of these, then you would have reports. Then you would have app reports. But if it's only one of them. Yeah, for site work purposes, they have to be nested. But yeah, if they're simple, I would start with them in the same file. And then if they got to a point where having them be in the same file was making it harder to read the file, I would move them. But then you move them under, it's a level down. Then you have app reports. You have app/model/reports to keep the site work of it all happy. Other comments? You and
This looks like something that Sandy Metz would be happy with.
well, that's all I ever try to do in my life, is do things that Sandy Metz would be happy with. Yes, but yeah, Sandy has a whole talk that is effectively this, and I don't remember which one it is, but one of Sandy's talks effectively is how to apply this pattern throughout your code, and how it simplifies. Because the other thing about this is that this also takes away the potential combinatoric explosion. And so in a complicated case, this is going to be simpler. You there in the back. There's no particular reason in this case. You could have a service object. If I understand the domain, then I try to do things that aren't service. Service is super generic. And if I understand the domain, there's usually a not generic topic, a not generic concept that it attaches to. But if there are certainly all sorts of cases where I'm like in a consultant hat and I'm going from project to project to project, and it's certainly like service is a thing that all applications have, so it's an abstraction that is applicable in a wide range of stuff, so it's an easy way to do a domain model. But if I really understand the domain, I try to avoid it. Anybody over here? Is this good? Do you like this? Sorry, I couldn't resist. The null object pattern is a subset of this. So in this case, the null object pattern is replacing null with an actual object that has minimal behavior. So going back to the previous one, I often, if I have something that might return a null object or might not, then the prefix for it is maybe. So this is maybe an experience for this kind, and if the experience is actually there, it gives me the actual experience, and if not, it gives me a null experience. The null experience never matches, again, I didn't update this one, never qualifies, and so you don't have to do the nil check. You have a nil experience now has meaning in the program, and it has logic attached to it, so you can actually do things with it. The reason, why do I need to have both of these have null question mark? We have 10 minutes. Do anybody know? One of the few things in Ruby that you can't do flexibly is you cannot set up an arbitrary object as being literal false, Boolean false. So you have to have a separate check for whether this is a null object or not. So you have to have your own separate check. Okay. We are coming really close to time, and I just want to mention one other thing that is a complex method with a lot of local variables often works really, really well as its own class. Local variables really make refactoring complicated. You factor them out to single line methods. Suddenly the actual thing that your class is doing becomes much clearer. So that's just a pitch for that. We're almost out of time. I do want to mention, I think everyone's getting tired or bored of listening to me or both. I do want to mention quickly the literal gem, which to me is a sweet spot of some of the things that we've been talking about. The literal gem by Joel Draper lets you specify properties of objects like this. So what does it look like this is doing? Yeah, it's essentially adding, right. So it is replacing the boilerplate initialize. So this is saying I have a name property that is a string. It has an experiences property that is a string. They're both by default keyword arguments. They have public readers. The experiences has a default list. And it is generating the initialize method that will do this. So even if it only did that boilerplate, this would be great and I would use it all the time. In addition to that, it type checks. So when I create the object, it will raise a runtime error if the name is not a string, if the experiences is not an experience class. That's also cool. The really cool thing is what it does to do that type check. Any guesses? Triple equals. It does a runtime check using triple equals. This is what Joel says in the documents. A type in Ruby is any object that results to triple equals with a truthy or falsy value. I don't 100% believe that, but it makes sense in this context, right? Okay, given that triple equals is the type check, what can you do then? What are some of the things that meaningfully implement triple equals in Ruby? Ranges, yeah. Regular expressions, yeah. There's one that's even more interesting. Classes, yeah. Well, right. Classes obviously are what it's using here, right? Procs. Procs are triple equal to things that return true from the proc. So what can you do then? If your class could be a proc, anything that a proc returns true on, you could do pretty much any damn thing you want. You want this thing to say like, it's got to be an even number? You could do that. You want to say it's got to be a positive number, which is actually a useful thing sometimes? You can do that. You want it to be a prime number for some reason? You can do that too. Like you can do, and so they provide a bunch of pre-installed pseudotypes. So these are all defined. They are given names, but they're all defined as procs. So you have nillable, which takes a real type, so it can be nil or that type. You can have a union type. You can do things with ranges. So this is a string with a non-empty string, a positive integer. This is a string matching a email address. You get a runtime error if it's not actually an email address. The bottom one, which you can't see, is integer from 0 to 255. It's a byte. So then you can create a union type that is an RGB. It's real cool. What I like about it in this context is it allows every class to be a boundary. I sort of implicitly get this type checking, and it's very flexible, and then I can just write Ruby, and it just works, and I get a certain amount of type checking more or less for free. And it's extremely flexible. So I recommend at least trying this. Look at this, try it. Maybe you won't like it. He has some other tools that are a little bit more static typey that I like less. This to me is a very sweet spot. So it's worth checking out. Okay, we're about to hear Ruby can in fact do type checking. Type checking is part of data validation. Set boundaries, use the type system. That's it, you made it. Congratulations, we all made it to the end. I really do appreciate your time here. I hope you liked it. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm Noel, I don't put it here, I'm Noel Rapp on a bunch of social media, including Blue Sky and in the local Slack. If you have comments, positive or negative, I really would appreciate hearing them in case I ever happen to do this again for some reason. But really do appreciate your time and your attention and your willingness to participate. That really helps. And it makes us great, and it makes this community great. So thank you all very much. All this stuff is still true. I have a newsletter at noelrappin.com that very, very intermittently will spit emails at you. And the book is out. The version 4 of the book will come out in December. Pragmatic is currently have a 50% off sale on everything with Save 50. Everything at Pragmatic is 50% off. I think it's the biggest sale they've ever done. This book is not on sale yet. The previous version is. I don't know whether you want to buy the previous version with the new version coming out in 3 weeks. That's a you thing. But at these prices, who can afford not to? So this will come out in relatively early beta, more or less contemporaneously with the Ruby release December 25th. So thank you very much.